Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm your host, Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm speaking with Bruce Culleton, MD, CEO at ProKidney, an autologous cell therapy company that aims to disrupt the treatment landscape in chronic kidney disease, an incurable condition that typically leads to kidney dialysis. ProKidney hopes to delay or even eliminate the need for dialysis among chronic kidney disease patients by preserving kidney function and has a lead candidate, rilparencel, entering phase 3 clinical trials. Bruce is a first-time CEO with deep industry experience, and I'm excited to speak with him about his journey to the chief executive role at ProKidney, his clinical development strategy and engagement with the FDA, and what a new treatment could mean for patients with chronic kidney disease. Thank you so much for being here, Bruce.
That's my pleasure, Ben. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, I mentioned you're an MD. You worked in academia and as a researcher and associate professor. What interested you initially, Bruce, about nephrology as a field of study?
I think, Ben, sometimes it comes down to when you're choosing subspecialties for a lot of medical students, it comes down to the mentor. It comes down to who you're exposed to either during your medical school or for me during my internal medicine training. And my mentor was a nephrologist at that time. I trained in nephrology in Canada, and my mentor at that time was an Irish nephrologist who was well known for his research in the sort of intersection between heart disease and kidney disease. He was a very strong personality. Dr. Patrick Parfrey is his name. And Dr. Parfrey at that time was also the coach of the national Canadian rugby team. So very big, very strong, very firm in his opinions. And he twisted my arm to move my way into nephrology.
Well, speaking of the connection between kidney and heart disease, you also did a fellowship in clinical epidemiology at Boston University on the Framingham Heart Study. I wonder what you could say about that experience. It's a fairly famous study.
So Dr. Parfrey was the one who connected me with the Framingham Heart Study as well. So Pat was sitting on a data safety committee with the head of the Framingham Heart Study at that time, Dan Levy. And they were on a data safety committee for a large phase 3 kidney product. And the head of Framingham in some hallway conversation said, look, we in Framingham. And so within 12 months, I found myself moving to Framingham, Massachusetts. That, as you alluded to, is a very famous study. The study started back in back in the 1940s. And when I was there, they were on their third generation of participants that were coming back every 2 to 4 years for exams. And just for your listeners, that study was originally established in a small town about 30 miles outside of Boston called Framingham, mainly a blue-collar town at that point in time. They recruited 5,200 people from the community, and the plan was to follow them every 2 years for infinity, if you like, for as long as they were alive. And that's what they did. And then they recruited their offspring, and now they're still recruiting participants in the Framingham Heart Study, where they have been recently. And Framingham was responsible for identifying cholesterol as a risk factor for heart disease.
Right.
It elucidated the role of hypertension and its impact on the heart and stroke. It elucidated the role of smoking, of thickening of the heart muscle. I could go on and on. Thousands of publications came from this center. And my focus when I moved there was on the intersection between kidney disease and heart disease.
Well, it's incredible that you got to be a part of that. Longitudinal studies are so important, especially as new drugs come into the marketplace. That's pretty cool. In 2007, you made the jump to industry. You worked at Baxter in renal therapeutics. You got a master's degree in business administration too, from the Kellogg School at Northwestern during your time at Baxter. What circumstances led to that jump? What made you decide to leave academia for industry?
So it came down to actually a couple of things. So the first was um, I wanted to have a bigger difference. I was seeing patients. We had, worked with a great team, very successful at getting grants, and recruiting researchers into our team. But I saw patients also on almost on a daily basis. And I was seeing just individual patients and having impact on individual patients, but I really wanted to have a bigger difference. And that led me to think about how I might do that. At the same time, the medical lead for Baxter Healthcare within the renal division was a woman called Sarah Pritchard. And again, this comes down to just meeting people, getting to know them, and establishing connections. And Sarah and I met at a meeting 5 years before that, introduced by Dr. Parfrey. And Sarah invited me to come down and speak to their team, understand what they were doing. I was very happy with what I was doing in Calgary, but they made me an offer to move to Chicago and join Baxter. And I de-risked that move by talking to the Department of Medicine and said, look, if I don't like this, can I come back? And he
Oh,
said,
interesting.
absolutely. But I loved it. My wife and I moved to Chicago area. We both really enjoyed it. I loved uh, really making connections that I never did in academia. So the connections were with marketing, were with strategic finance, with engineering, with people that typically within academia you're not exposed to. And those sort of newer perspectives were just eye-opening. And I also got to see how the company thought about business, about how you think about bringing a product to market, how you could create a sustainable business. And immediately I became interested in the business side of things. Even though I was there as a medical director for one of their dialysis programs, immediately I became interested in not just the business side of kidney failure, but also the global business side. So,
Yeah.
diabetic kidney disease, as an example, is diabetic kidney disease in the US and Canada and the UK and elsewhere and elsewhere and elsewhere. But how that care is delivered differs in every country. And that was also fascinating. So I loved it. They supported my MBA at Kellogg. And then that just sort of made my interest in different parts of business even more so after that.
Yeah, so you were exposed to these not just kind of internal and local or organizational business issues, but also, the global business arena. And you said did Baxter help pay for the master's degree?
They
Is that
did.
right?
Yeah, they paid for it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
they had a great program. And I know a lot of companies do this, but it really has a meaningful impact on someone's career when they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You left Baxter, you went to Becton Dickinson, and then to CVS, staying in the kind of kidney area. What did you learn through those experiences? And then what circumstances led to your joining ProKidney in 2023?
So my Becton Dickinson experience was pretty short, Ben. So I was there for about 18 months. I was leading two things. One was their medication and procedural solutions medical affairs business. And I also was leading a clinical development program that they had, and they had over 100 trials in development. And so that was actually very fascinating for me to be part of that. But then an offer came from CVS, which was too good to pass over. And that's why I left. And so the offer that came from CVS was from Dr. Alan Lotvin, who had a senior role at CVS. And Alan reached out to me and said, look, we're thinking about creating a kidney business within CVS. Would you be interested? And so I joined as their chief medical officer. I think I was the second or third employee. And we established a new business called CVS Kidney Care. And our goal at that time was really to disrupt how kidney disease was identified, how the services were rolled out to kidney patients, and also how dialysis was performed.
Hmm.
And it was around that same time where um, the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative, I think that was the name of it. That was a bipartisan, that was an executive order, sorry, in President Trump's first term, which really highlighted some of the unmet needs in the care of kidney disease patients. It also established some new value-based care pathways. And so we were focused on several things. We were focused on home dialysis. We actually completed a clinical trial for a new home dialysis device. We were partnering with satellite healthcare in several dialysis clinics. We also joined the value-based care program and had value-based care activities primarily in the Chicago area. And we did some fascinating things around digital interventions, um, and even tested some digital interventions to help identify patients with chronic kidney disease and sort of nudge them to get better care within their local community. Um, yeah, a fascinating experience at that time, around the time when the value-based care thing was taking off in the kidney space as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Were the digital devices actually diagnosing chronic kidney disease, or what would you say about that?
So there were digital interventions, so they weren't necessarily digital devices. So I'll give you an example. It could be as simple as we would identify within a health insurance database someone that has chronic kidney disease and didn't see a nephrologist within the prior 3 or 6 months, someone with
Okay.
advanced chronic kidney disease. So we were able to use that database and then to provide an intervention, whether it was at the pharmacy or whether it was simply through a communication to their home through their health insurance. So it was those types of nudges, I think, that tended to move patients to direct to seek care. And all that was done within a health insurance environment like CVS and Aetna had at that point in time. And we actually saw changes in behavior based upon some of those interventions.
I want to come back to how you landed at ProKidney, but
Yeah.
you brought up dialysis and at-home dialysis. It's not a fun process for patients. I believe still most patients are going to a dialysis center like Fresenius or DaVita, or I guess they're a single entity now at this point, but it's a very big business. What do you have a sense of what percentage of patients with chronic kidney disease are actually doing dialysis at home versus having to go to a clinic?
Yeah, it depends upon what country you look at, Ben, but in the US, it's been a year or so since I looked at the figure, but I would say it's something like 87% of all patients are treated in center. You
Yeah,
know,
okay, that's what I thought. And it's a big business, like $100 billion globally or more, I believe.
it's a huge business and it's a business that is really craving for innovation. I gave a talk at ASN's Kidney Week in, I think it was 2019 at their plenary session, and I did it with an entrepreneur inventor called Dean Kamen. And Dean and I paired up for that talk. And part of, when I started talking about the need for innovation in the kidney space, I referred to my journey where I left sort of clinical and academic practice, where I spent a lot of time in the dialysis unit. And just a couple of weeks before this talk that I gave at Kidney Week, and that was separated by over 10 years. And I went to a dialysis clinic here in Boston, 10 years later. And the only difference that I saw in that dialysis clinic was flat screen TVs. It was like time stood still. Nothing changed, but they had flat screen TVs and better chairs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty amazing. Let's go back to Pro Kidney and how you ended up there. What were the circumstances that brought you to Pro Kidney?
Yeah. So at CVS was we were really testing these new care models, and some of them were working and some of them were not working. But CVS didn't want to scale the models because there were also competitors in the space that had already scaled regionally and some of them even nationally. Examples would be Strive and Monogram, who really, have advanced the value-based care programs across the country. And so rather than continue to develop ours, I mean, CVS did have a lot of capital. They ended up investing in established value-based care models, and we wound down or sold back some of the assets that we developed to CVS and to Aetna.
Yeah, and value-based care for those that are listening that may not know exactly what we're talking about here, the main benefit I think of value-based healthcare is that you're paying for the care based on outcomes. Is that correct, or how would you describe it in this context?
Correct. So if let's just say that you are a Medicare member on dialysis, then through more historical ways of payment, your dialysis company would get reimbursed from Medicare every time you had dialysis, a certain amount. Under a value-based care program, the
That's the
dialysis,
fee for service model,
that's right, a
right?
fee-for-service model, yeah. Under a value-based care program, then that patient or the provider of the care for that patient would only get reimbursed based upon the outcomes, meaning keeping patients out of hospital, meaning certain quality metrics are met. Those types of outcomes, at the end of the day, they would get reimbursed from Medicare for that type of outcome as opposed to just a fee for service.
And so the incentive structure changes. The incentive is no longer getting people into the dialysis clinic, it's actually making the patient better.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And the newer programs, the original programs were set up for dialysis, and the newer programs have now expanded into the pre-dialysis space as well.
So when did you join what year did you join Pro Kidney? Did did you meet Pablo Legarreta, who I believe founded the company? Let us know about, the kind of those circumstances.
Sure. So I joined in I think it was July of 2023. We just wound down some of the businesses at CVS. And a board member on ProKidney, Dr. Lotvin, who hired me at CVS. He was on the board of ProKidney. He twisted my arm to look at the opportunity at ProKidney. And I was looking at several different opportunities, some of them in the dialysis space. But Alan twisted my arm, and obviously I met with Pablo, and I was somewhat skeptical. It sounded like science fiction, but I was also very intrigued. And it took me several months of really looking at some data, talking to colleagues across the world, before I said, yes, I'll join ProKidney. And obviously I talked to Pablo as well. And I knew Pablo. I've met him several times before that in different other settings, didn't know him that well, but he was a co-founder of ProKidney, and his investment in ProKidney really moved the company into phase two and eventually into a phase three clinical study program. And and he's been public about this, his investment was driven by kidney disease in his family.
Right.
And his big co-investor, who remains a big investor in ProKidney, is Carlos Slim. And Carlos Slim's investment was also driven by kidney disease in his family. So they have not just a financial interest, but also personal interest in us being successful.
And just as a side note, Pablo Legarreta, extremely successful entrepreneur who also founded and is the CEO of Royalty Pharma. Um, how familiar were you, Bruce, with autologous cell therapy before joining ProKidney? Was it a modality that you had worked with at all? How much did you know? Did you know what you were getting into?
Um, I didn't know much, and I didn't know what I was getting into. Okay, quite honestly, and but I had my eyes wide open, and I've always been curious. And so I was curious in this setting as well. Um, I didn't know cell therapy, but I knew the kidney space. And I knew the kidney space really well, and I knew how to lead teams. And I knew how to, create a strong culture, and I knew the business of the kidney space, but I
Yeah.
didn't know cell therapy. And we had experts in house who knew cell therapy, but there was a learning curve for me on the drug product for sure.
And I don't think you joined as CEO, right? When did you know that you wanted to be the CEO of a cell therapy biotech?
So I joined as an EVP of commercialization and clinical development. They created a role for me, and that role was really a successor role to the CEO when they created it.
Okay.
But I don't think anyone expected that transition to happen as fast as it did. So I joined in July, and November I was the CEO. And there were some challenges that I've been public about within ProKidney. One of them on the manufacturing side, which we've overcome. The team did an amazing job to overcome some of the challenges, but we had an auditor as part of a QP auditor from Europe that is part of any program where you're doing a clinical trial in Europe. And the auditor found some critical and major deficiencies in our manufacturing plant. And that combined with some other challenges the board had with the management team led to the board asking me to step into that role in November of 2023. And I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Ben. It's been hard work. It's been a lot of work. It's been, bringing in some really talented people. It's around fixing some mistakes that happened in the past. And I think now we're on, really good trajectory. We've had some great interactions with the FDA. We've made some big strategic trade-offs in how we think about our clinical development program, and we've really fixed what we're doing on the manufacturing side as well. So we're in a great spot. And I guess what I'm most proud of, if anyone asked me if what I'm most proud of, is we have 250 employees, and I could say all of our employees are dedicated to our mission and our sense of purpose. And that's all around how do we give patients who have advanced chronic kidney disease more time away from dialysis? How do we give them and their family members a lot more time by delaying as long as we possibly can the need for dialysis? And you alluded to it, dialysis is not easy. And anyone that's been on dialysis will tell you that their life changed overnight. And that's where we want to have an impact.
I should have asked you about this earlier when we were talking about dialysis, but for the listeners, could you just maybe give us an idea of what the kind of traditional process and administration is for dialysis? How often, how long, what it looks like?
Yeah, of course. So I'll talk about those 87% of patients who get their dialysis in a treatment center. So what that means is 3 times per week, they leave their home. They commute, either drive or commute by taxi or public transportation to dialysis center. They sit in a chair for up to 4 hours. They have 2 needles put in their arm, and the blood comes out of one of their needles, goes through a machine, and goes back into the other needle. The procedure itself is frequently complicated by infections and low blood pressure. And many patients, when they leave their dialysis unit, they are not feeling any better, sometimes worse than when they went in. And many of them, there's a metric that's used, it's called time to recover. Many of them will say it takes me 24 or even 36 hours to recover from my dialysis treatment. And then they have to do it again.
Yeah.
And there's no end in sight for some patients who, aren't suitable for a kidney transplant. This is their life forever.
And what happens if you don't go to dialysis, if you skip it?
So if you don't go to dialysis, your fluid that is typically removed in a dialysis treatment, that accumulates in your body. The electrolytes, importantly, like potassium that's removed in a dialysis treatment, that builds up in your body. The potassium itself can lead to arrhythmias and sudden death. The fluid accumulation could lead to a collection of fluid in your lungs, and you'll have trouble breathing, so much so that some patients will actually die of heart failure.
Right. Right. I wanted to ask you about the manufacturing briefly. It's not, autologous cell therapy manufacturing is not the same thing as, large bioreactor monoclonal antibody manufacturing. You're based in Boston, Bruce. Can you give me a sense of what the manufacturing capability looks like at ProKidney? Are you doing your own manufacturing? Are you working with CDMO? I think you have some facilities in North Carolina. Is that right?
Correct. So our manufacturing facilities are in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We have one facility today that's supporting our phase 3 program, and we're building out another facility next door. And that manufacturing process, so just to give your listeners an example of what happens. So for us, we obtain a kidney biopsy from patients who are enrolled in our study. And that small piece of tissue goes back to our manufacturing facility. That tissue may have 50,000 to 100,000 cells. Over the course of the next few weeks, under the right culture media, we end up with billions of cells. And then we select out a certain type of those cells through a manufacturing process. And that type of cells that we end up selecting out have markers that resemble tubular and interstitial cells in the kidney, but they're the same, they're the patient cells, they're their own cells. So there's no concerns about rejection when those cells are injected back into the patient. We take those billions of cells and we put them into separate vials based upon a dose that's required for the patient. And then that one vial then gets shipped back to the study site, and it's injected back into a patient's kidney by an interventional radiologist under CT guidance. And so that's a very specific location where we inject those cells. And then what happens to those cells is we believe that those cells help the patient's innate repair and recovery mechanism. And what we've seen clinically is really a stabilization of kidney function after those cells are injected.
Okay. All right. I wanted to ask you, there's over 35 million Americans, I think,
Mhm.
with chronic kidney disease, 800 million plus worldwide. We've talked about dialysis, hopefully getting some patients out of or preventing them from going into dialysis. What do you see as kind of the biggest opportunity for these patients, or the biggest unmet need? Is it simply avoiding dialysis, or are there other elements to chronic kidney disease that you hope to tackle?
So, just for your listeners, of those 33 million, 30 plus million patients in the US with kidney disease, most of them don't even know they have it. And so the greatest opportunity to help them would be through screening and awareness. So even patients who have high blood pressure, their kidney function is not getting checked. And it's easy to check it. It's a urine test, it's a blood test. There's not even a complicated blood test. A lot of patients who've got diabetes don't even know they have kidney disease, even though that's recommended as a screening tool for everyone with type 2 diabetes, for example. So the biggest impact, I think, from a society perspective would be to improve awareness and education around chronic kidney disease. So those 30 plus million patients who have kidney disease will get detected early. And we have good drugs, even good lifestyle measures to help those patients in very early chronic kidney disease. Most of those patients, by the way, will never end up in a dialysis unit.
Oh,
So, So today in the US, I think we have, somewhere 500 to 600,000 dialysis patients. Most of them that start at the top of the pyramid will never get down to need dialysis. They have competing risk factors, and unfortunately, many of them will die of one of those competing risks, like heart disease, for example, or some of them may just simply die of old age. Um, Now, for those people that do end up with more advanced chronic kidney disease, and our estimates are there's about 4 million people in the US who have lost over 70% of their kidney function. Now, that's a lot of people. And that's a lot of people who are on the path to dialysis. And every year, there's somewhere between 130 to 150,000 people who start on dialysis. And those are the people that we want to prevent. We want to prevent people from going from stage 4 to need dialysis. And that's really where our target population is. But again, getting back to the biggest opportunity, it's detecting kidney disease early, lifestyle changes, and there are new drugs that clearly make a difference in slowing down progression of kidney disease if patients are identified.
It's almost unbelievable that patients are not tested, particularly type 2 diabetes patients are not screened for chronic kidney disease when you can actually take an action,
Right.
to slow it down. And you said that there are recommendations to get tested. What what would be needed in terms of, I guess, guidance? Maybe it's a Medicare coverage issue. I'm not sure, but what would be from a policy perspective, what would be a good way to make sure that people were screened more often and could find out, that they had chronic kidney disease and could take action?
So there are guidelines on this. There are also guidelines on screening, and those guidelines are paid for in certain populations, like patients who have diabetes for so long. The provider will get reimbursed for that screening. But as you know, it's not just about the reimbursement to the provider. Sometimes these visits, have out-of-pocket costs for patients. And not every patient can afford out-of-pocket costs, especially if it leads to more and more visits.
Right.
And so access to care is continues to be a real challenge, and kidney disease is overrepresented in poorer communities, rural communities, some ethnic backgrounds. And so there are, I would say, societal challenges that come with making sure that everyone who's got kidney disease is detected early and treated the right way.
Is the percentage of patients that get dialysis at home increasing? I assume it's more expensive for home dialysis versus in clinic dialysis, but I don't know that to be true.
So the two questions there, is home dialysis increasing? I think slowly. It's not, it's very challenging, but slowly it's increasing. And there have been some policy initiatives that help improve number of patients who are treated with home dialysis. The economics for the provider are also important. And under value-based care initiatives, home dialysis tends to be more profitable for a value-based care provider. So that's also a move definitely a move in the right direction. Um, and then there's just a lot of education that needs to come with it. And, you know, some of this is patient education. If you could imagine being told for the first time as a patient, you've got kidney failure, and that's a surprise for you, completely out of the blue, and you need to start dialysis, you're more likely to say, I want that treatment in a clinic where I have nurses around me than say, I want to do that at home,
Yeah.
even though the outcomes for you are better at home. The
Oh,
outcomes are
really?
really better for you at home. And the societal costs are lower at home, all things considered. But most patients still end up in center.
What getting back to ProKidney, what is unique about autologous cell therapy as a modality for treating chronic kidney disease. What do you like about that approach? It sounds like you had kind of a baptism by fire, rising up to the CEO role very quickly, having to kind of clean up some manufacturing issues right away. You got to know all about autologous cell therapy as a modality very quickly. Um, what, you know, what do you like about it? What do you see as its kind of chief promise?
So what I like about it is that even though it's a complex process to make our product, it's the patient's own cells. And every product is slightly different because it comes from the individual patient. So every product is its own batch. And if you think about personalized medicine, this is personalized medicine at its best. It's the patient's own cells that go back into the patient that are healthier, and we believe sort of encourage the innate repair and recovery mechanism to work on stabilizing kidney function. So that's the piece that I really like. There's no gene edits, even though I am a big fan of gene therapy. There's no gene edits. And there's no pre-treatment for the patient.
Right.
In other sort of cell therapies, let's say in the oncology space, there's a pre-treatment for the patient. They're often extremely sick. And the pre-treatment may make it even more difficult for them over a short period of time. We don't have any of that. It's simply patient's own cells. They're relatively stable, slowly progressing, year over year, but they're not, in a hospital acutely sick. And so there are clear differences between what people hear around CAR T cell therapy versus what we're trying to do in the kidney space.
Right. I mean, the it's a huge advantage to not have to chronically administer immunosuppressants, which, autologous cell therapy is a complicated process, but that kind of in and of itself is very significant. What would you say is or what do you see as the biggest challenges that you'll have to overcome, Bruce, to make this successful and get it out to patients?
So obviously we need to finish our phase 3 program. We're currently doing really well on enrollment. We will have a readout, a top line readout for accelerated approval in May or June of 2027. So that's not too far away. Should that be successful, which we all think it will be, but should that be successful, then I think some of the challenges that we will have will be primarily on the commercial side. How do we scale up appropriately? How do we manage to get the capital that we need to scale up appropriately? How do we manage the demand?
Yeah. So it sounds like you've started to think about launch and commercialization and what that might look like. You're already starting it. I guess what are your initial thoughts in terms of the scope of a launch? How big would that potentially be following approval?
So the process is more complex than someone waking up every morning and taking a pill, right?
Yes.
A lot more complex. With that said, once you have your 2 injections, because we inject both kidneys 3 months apart, once we inject both kidneys, you're done. Primarily, you're done. So you don't have to worry about taking your pill every morning or twice a day or something like that. You've actually gotten your treatment, and then we will follow you over time. But one of the things we need to think about is how do we ensure that when we launch, that the patient experience and the provider experience is best in class,
Yeah.
right? Because there are a lot of touch points. It's not just with the nephrologist, it's also with the doctor who does the biopsy. Then it's with the interventional radiologist who does the injections. And then it's back to the nephrologist for follow-up. That experience for a patient really has to be seamless. right?
Right. So you kind of work to standardize that process as best you can, make it as most efficient as you can, and then simply replicate it out from there. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And the interventional radiologist needs to be trained appropriately. The nephrologist needs to know how to have that conversation with their patient before you prescribe it. So that whole process, in my mind, is critical in the first, 12 to 18 months after launch. And so the way, we would be thinking about this is how do we make that a best-in-class process so the patient experience is great, the provider experience is great. And that may mean that we just don't, go gangbusters like you might if you had a small molecule and you wanted uptake across the country.
What about, global launch? Will you conduct additional trials, do that kind of as a second step? Are you thinking about potentially commercializing outside of the US? Are you doing that work in parallel? How do you think about that?
So we made a big strategic trade-off um, in the summer of 24. And in the summer of 24, we had two phase 3 studies that we were running. And this decision was made before my time, before I joined ProKidney. One phase 3 study was primarily US, and the other phase 3 study was primarily Europe and Asia. And we had something called an RMAT designation at that point in time. And an RMAT designation typically gives the sponsor certain benefits, including an accelerated approval pathway, and even a pathway where you really don't need two phase 3 studies. So in the summer of 24, I asked that question, like, why are we doing two phase 3 studies? Both studies are expensive. They're diluting our resources. Where's our market that we want to launch in, and where do we think as a company we can be most successful? And that was clearly the US. So after discussion with the FDA, we made a decision to stop our other phase 3 study.
Okay.
And that saved us about 150 to 170 million dollars. That really helped with our cash runway. And those are some decisions that you have to make because you're constantly trying to balance, what do we really need to do and how will our cash runway take us there? And so that was that trade-off we made back then. And now our cash runway takes us into the mid of 2027 after a readout. And that's what you really want, is you want your cash to take you to a readout and a little bit longer after that readout. So that's where we are today. So we're very fortunate given the fact that a lot of biotechs are working with less than 12 months cash.
Yeah, right.
So just getting back to Europe then. So we don't have plans today, but we are definitely open to working with partners who may be interested in, expansion in Europe or expansion in parts of Asia. But our focus today is truly our focus is executing the phase 3 program that we're doing today well, so that we'll have a positive readout in May or June of 2027.
And we're talking about rilparencel. That's the lead program at ProKidney. I think it was a November kind of corporate report or presentation. You had at that time enrolled over half of the population needed for the phase 3 trial. You've mentioned when you expect to get that kind of top line data read, and for this particular lead indication, you're pursuing patients with chronic kidney disease caused by type 2 diabetes. What percentage of the overall CKD population does that represent? And also, is type 2 diabetes the kind of primary driver of CKD?
So, if you look at all the patients who start dialysis in the US today, the 130 or 140,000, 60%, 60% will have type 2 diabetes.
Wow. Okay.
Now,
Is that uncontrolled type 2 diabetes?
no, not necessarily. I mean, some of them may have had poorly controlled type 2 diabetes over time, but I wouldn't universally say that it's all uncontrolled. But of that 60%, there are some patients who just have type 2 diabetes and another reason why they have kidney failure. And then there's another group that about 40% of the total that have kidney failure due to type 2 diabetes. And those
Okay.
are the patients that we're really trying to have a therapy for. Uh,
Do you anticipate expanding the indication beyond patients with chronic kidney disease caused by type 2 diabetes?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we don't have a program looking at that today, but if I could just explain to you what happens to most patients who end up in stage 4 chronic kidney disease, and that's really we're studying stage 4 patients with type 2 diabetes, and they've lost over 70% of their kidney function. But what happens is in that sort of final stage before dialysis, a lot of patients have mainly fibrosis and inflammation that's driving their progression. The underlying cause of their kidney disease is already established. It's already sort of injured the kidney, years and years and years of high sugars, for example, and the inflammation that come with that. And this late stage, almost in every form of kidney disease, there's a big driver being fibrosis and a big driver being inflammation. We think what we're doing is having an impact on that fibrosis and inflammation.
Okay.
And there's probably nothing unique about it because they have type 2 diabetes. It's really that fibrosis and inflammation. So we chose to focus on type 2 diabetes because that's the greatest unmet need. But at the same time, we hope to be able to develop programs in the future where we can almost have like an umbrella therapy for all those patients who have stage 4 disease as an option for those patients as well.
At what point is it too late for real cell to help? I mean, for patients with kidney failure, you're not going to regenerate or bring that back, right?
Yeah, that's true. So the way we've designed our studies today is if your estimated glomerular filtration rate, your eGFR, your measure of kidney function, is less than 20, you can't get into our study. And that's probably going to be what our label would say too, is that we can treat patients down to a level of 20 mLs per minute, but not less. Do I believe it works in someone with 15? Yes. But the safety risk also increases the lower your kidney function is. So your kidneys become smaller, becomes harder to do a biopsy, becomes harder to do an injection. And so your risk around safety events also goes up. So we tried to create that right balance between choosing patients who we really think will benefit, while at the same time being a little bit, conservative around the safety side because, we're still an investigational product and we wouldn't want this innovation to stop because of safety issues.
You mentioned earlier that Real Cell has received FDA's Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy designation, RMAT. You talked about some of the key benefits there, one of which, a big one, that you only potentially have to do one phase 3 trial. It's an accelerated regulatory pathway. Um, are there any other benefits conferred by that designation? And then after that, I want to ask you a little bit just about, your interactions with the FDA and sort of what that looks like. And I have listeners in mind, who may be in the early stages of starting up a cell therapy company or thinking about various regulatory pathways and designations. And so, any kind of color you can provide, on what those interactions look like, I think would be useful. But aside from the singular phase 3 trial, the accelerated pathway, is there anything else that you would mention that, you think is important as part of that designation, that RMAT designation?
Yeah, so the RMAT designation certainly allowed us to have more regular interactions with the FDA, particularly around, developing the protocol or CMC strategy and lots of other things as well. But for me, I'd say the two biggest things we've already hit upon. One is one phase 3 study, and the second is an accelerated approval pathway using a surrogate endpoint, and we're using eGFR. And those two big decisions came about by having great interactions and meetings with the FDA face to face.
Oh, interesting.
And I will say that at least in my time at ProKidney and even my previous reactions with the FDA, they're scientists. Um, they're for the most part extremely rational thinkers based in science. And sure, there's a policy piece to it, but usually when you have a discussion around the science and the clinical data and sort of an understanding of how your product might potentially work, it's been really good. I mean, they've been great to work with.
When's your next meeting with the FDA?
So we don't have any meetings coming up in the next 6 months or so. The next big clinical meeting will obviously be around our readout when we get to our top line data. And then there'll be some more manufacturing and CMC type meetings, between now and then.
If you, I guess, best case scenario or best of all possible worlds, when would you like to see this product approved and start getting out the door to patients?
So I think best of all possible worlds, like we have a readout in, let's say, June of 27. We put the finishing touches on our BLA. We submit that at the end of 2027, and we get approval in 2028. So
Okay.
best case scenario is probably mid 2028, given timelines.
Not a bad timeline.
No, no, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're getting to the end of our time here, Bruce. What would you say are your top priorities for the rest of this year and looking into the beginning of 2026?
So we're almost at the end of this year, and we've met all our goals for this year as a team. So I think our broader team has done just an amazing job this year in getting us to where we are to finish the year. Next year, our priorities are primarily around preparing for that top line readout in 2027 and being ready for that BLA that we need to put together. So that's what our activities in 2026 are really driven around: completing the study, making sure we have the data in place to do the readout, making sure we have everything else on the clinical, technical, manufacturing side ready for that BLA submission. That takes 12 to 18 months at a minimum to get ready for. So really, that's really a big driver for us in next year. And I'll say the other big thing for me is just maintaining the culture of our team. We're all driven by a sense of purpose. We've had patients come into our team meetings, our all employee meetings, and we all see why we're doing this and why it's important. And we're not going to get anything done unless we have everyone behind us. And
Right.
so that's also a big thing for us next year.
All right, in the final 2 minutes, I was thinking about this interview coming into it, and this question popped in my head. It's not related to Pro Kidney, but I'm curious. As a kidney expert, maybe you could answer this. Someone who's in the worst stages of kidney failure, the only real option they have is transplant. Let's say, and this is a hypothetical, I promise, but let's say I have a sibling who has severe kidney failure. I find out that I could potentially give them a kidney to
Yeah.
save their life. How and there's we don't have time to get into the whole issue of available kidneys for donation and how that happens, but how risky is that? Would it make from a cost benefit kind of analysis, would it make good sense for me to give one of my kidneys to a sibling in that instance?
So Ben, usually those, whether it's a living related donor or just an altruistic donor, someone who just in the good of their heart says, look, I'm going to give up my kidney,
I don't need
someone
both.
that matches, right? There are some altruistic donors. They all have to go through a pretty rigorous medical assessment. So the medical risk of donating a kidney becomes minimal because you can't donate a kidney if you've got diabetes
Okay.
or uncontrolled high blood pressure or other things that might complicate your post donation recovery. So they undergo a very rigorous assessment. So that's one. And then number two, having talked to many kidney donors, the the emotional benefits that come with helping someone to that degree to keep your loved one alive and their family. I mean, that benefit outweighs any small risk that may come on the clinical side.
I think that's a fantastic way to end. Bruce, it was really a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been my pleasure, Ben. Sometime maybe we could connect more on transplantation. There's also lots of real innovation happening in the transplantation space.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's do that. We've been speaking with Bruce Culleton, MD, CEO at ProKidney. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out new weekly videocasts of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at lifescienceleader.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks as always for listening.